The transport shuttle's engines hummed with that particular frequency that made Marcus Chen's teeth ache. He pressed his face against the small porthole, watching the massive space station grow larger as they approached. The Nexus was supposed to be the crown jewel of galactic diplomacy, where dozens of alien species came together to maintain peace across the stars. For Marcus, a junior diplomatic attaché, fresh out of the academy, it was either going to be the opportunity of a lifetime or the place where his career died a quick, embarrassing death. First time seeing the Nexus? Asked Commander Sarah Walsh, the shuttle's pilot. She was one of those career military types who seemed to have ice water in her veins and could probably navigate an asteroid field blindfolded. Yeah, Marcus replied, not taking his eyes off the station. The structure was absolutely massive, easily the size of a small moon, with docking bays that could accommodate everything from tiny courier ships to the enormous Galactic Council vessels. Streams of light from countless ships created patterns like glowing highways in the darkness of space. It's bigger than I imagined. Wait until you see the inside. The main diplomatic hall can hold representatives from every known species in the galaxy, and that's saying something considering some of the Vorthack delegates are the size of skyscrapers. Marcus nodded, trying to calm the butterflies in his stomach. His assignment was supposed to be straightforward: serve as a cultural liaison for human visitors, help with translation services, and basically try not to cause any interstellar incidents. The problem was that humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, having only made first contact 15 years ago. Most aliens still saw them as curious primitives who had somehow stumbled into space travel. The docking procedure was smooth, and soon Marcus found himself walking through the station's corridors with his single travel bag slung over his shoulder. The artificial gravity was set to galactic standard, which was slightly lighter than Earth normal, giving his steps a slight bounce. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something floral that he couldn't identify. The corridors were works of art in themselves. The walls seemed to be made of some kind of crystalline material that shifted colors as you walked past, displaying patterns that were supposedly soothing to most known species. Marcus had read about it in his briefings, but seeing it in person was something else entirely. Beings of every conceivable shape and size walked past him, tall, graceful creatures with too many joints in their limbs, squat beings that looked like walking boulders, and others that defied easy description. His destination was the human embassy, a relatively small section of the station that had been allocated to Earth's diplomatic mission. The walk took him through several different districts, each designed to accommodate the environmental needs of different species. He passed through a section where the lighting was dim and reddish, suitable for beings from worlds with different suns, and another where the ceiling was much higher to accommodate flying species. The human embassy was located in what the station maps called the Standard Environment Zone, along with several other species that had similar atmospheric and gravitational requirements. As he approached the familiar sight of the blue and white Earth flag, Marcus felt a mix of relief and homesickness wash over him. "You must be Marcus Chun," said a voice behind him. He turned to see a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested she'd been doing this job for a while. "Ambassador Elena Rodriguez. Welcome to the Nexus." "Thank you, Ambassador. I'm honored to be here. Let's hope you still feel that way in a few weeks," she said with a wry smile. "Come on, let me show you around and get you briefed on the current situation." The human embassy was smaller than Marcus had expected, but efficiently designed. There were offices for the ambassador and her staff, a communications center for maintaining contact with Earth, and living quarters for the permanent staff. The decoration was deliberately Earth-like, with wood paneling, real plants, and even a small fountain that created the sound of running water. "How many humans are stationed here permanently?" Marcus asked as they walked. 12, counting you. It's not a large operation, but we punch above our weight class. Humans have a reputation for being good mediators, probably because we're still considered neutral in most galactic conflicts. We don't have the long histories and ancient grudges that some of the older species carry around. They settled in Rodriguez's office, which had a large window overlooking one of the station's internal gardens. Marcus could see beings from several different species walking along the paths, some alone, others in groups that seemed to mix species freely. "So what exactly will I be doing?" Marcus asked. "Officially, you're a cultural liaison and translator. Unofficially, you're going to be my eyes and ears in the parts of the station where the ambassador can't go without causing a diplomatic incident. You speak Galactic standard better than anyone else we've got, and your xenobiology background means you understand alien psychology better than most humans." Marcus felt a surge of pride. He'd worked hard to get this assignment, spending years studying alien languages and cultures. The fact that his efforts were being recognized was gratifying. "There's a reception tonight for the arrival of the Zephyrian delegation," Rodriguez continued. "It'll be a good chance for you to meet some of the other diplomatic staff and get a feel for how things work around here. The Zephyrians are, well, they're complicated. Their society is based on rigid hierarchies, and they place enormous importance on proper protocol. I've read about them. They're the ones with the crystalline skin, right? That's them. Beautiful to look at, but don't let that fool you. They're also some of the most skilled politicians in the galaxy. Their princess, Lyralii, is here as part of the delegation. She's young by Zephyrian standards, but she's already gained a reputation as a brilliant negotiator." Marcus spent the rest of the day getting settled in his quarters and reviewing files on the various species and delegations currently on the station. The Nexus hosted a rotating population of diplomats, traders, and other officials, but there were certain groups that maintained permanent or semi-permanent presence. The Zephyrians were one of the more influential, representing a coalition of species from the galaxy's inner worlds. As evening approached, Marcus found himself getting ready for his first official diplomatic function. The dress code was formal galactic standard, which basically meant whatever formal was appropriate for your species. For humans, that meant a suit and tie. Marcus had brought his best dark blue suit, one that he'd had tailored specifically for diplomatic functions. It was important to make a good first impression. The reception was being held in one of the station's grand ballrooms, a space that could be configured for the environmental needs of multiple species simultaneously. As Marcus entered, he was struck by the sheer diversity of the gathering. Beings of every conceivable shape, size, and color mingled together, creating a visual spectacle unlike anything on Earth. The Zephyrian delegation was easy to spot. They stood in a loose group near the center of the room, their crystalline skin catching and refracting the light in mesmerizing patterns. They were tall and elegant, with features that seemed almost too perfect, as if they'd been carved by a master sculptor. Their clothing was simple but elegant, designed to complement rather than hide their natural beauty. "Impressive, aren't they?" said a voice beside him. Marcus turned to see a being that looked vaguely reptilian, with green scales and large, intelligent eyes. "I'm Ambassador Thrix of the Saurian Confederacy. You must be the new human. Marcus Chun, pleasure to meet you." The Zephyrians always make quite an impression at these gatherings. Their princess in particular is quite striking. Marcus followed Thrix's gaze and saw her immediately. Even among the beautiful Zephyrians, Princess Lyralii stood out. She was tall even by Zephyrian standards, with skin that seemed to contain entire galaxies of light. Her hair, if it could be called hair, flowed like liquid starlight, and her eyes were a deep violet that seemed to hold ancient wisdom despite her apparent youth. "She's certainly remarkable," Marcus managed. "Indeed, and brilliant too. I've seen her negotiate trade agreements that left seasoned diplomats wondering what just happened. The Zephyrians sent her here for a reason." As if sensing their discussion, Princess Lyralii looked in their direction. For a moment, her eyes met Marcus's across the crowded room. What happened next would puzzle Marcus for days to come. The princess's expression changed completely. The confident, regal bearing that had characterized her since Marcus first spotted her vanished in an instant. Her crystalline skin, which had been glowing with soft inner light, suddenly became pale and dim. Her eyes widened in what looked like shock, or perhaps fear. She took a step backward, nearly colliding with one of her attendants. The change was so dramatic that it caused a ripple of confusion through the nearby crowd. Other Zephyrians turned to look at their princess with concern, and Marcus could see several alien diplomats whispering among themselves, clearly puzzled by what they'd just witnessed. What in the galaxy was that about? Thrix muttered beside him. Marcus had no idea. He'd never seen Princess Lyralii before in his life, had never even been in the same star system as a Zephyrian until today. Yet her reaction suggested that seeing him had been deeply shocking, even frightening. I have no idea, Marcus replied, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something very important had just happened, something that was going to change everything. Princess Lyralii quickly composed herself, but Marcus noticed that she avoided looking in his direction for the rest of the evening. Whenever the crowd shifted, and it seemed like they might end up near each other, she would gracefully move to a different part of the room. It was done so smoothly that most people probably didn't notice, but Marcus was watching for it. The reception continued for several more hours, with the usual round of introductions, small talk, and careful diplomatic maneuvering. Marcus met representatives from dozens of different species and did his best to make a good impression for humanity. But throughout it all, he found his attention returning to the mystery of Princess Lyralii's reaction. During a quiet moment, he managed to catch Ambassador Rodriguez's attention. "Did you notice anything unusual about the Zephyrian princess tonight?" he asked quietly. Rodriguez looked puzzled. "No, why?" She seemed perfectly composed, as usual. "When she first saw me, she went pale. Really pale. Like she'd seen a ghost." "That's odd. You're sure she was looking at you specifically?" "Pretty sure." Ambassador Thrix noticed it too. Rodriguez frowned thoughtfully. Zephyrians don't typically have strong emotional reactions in public. Their culture values emotional control above almost everything else. If she reacted that strongly to seeing you, there has to be a reason. But what could it be? I've never met her, never even been to Zephyrian space. I don't know, but I suggest you be very careful around her. The Zephyrians are allies, but they're also incredibly powerful. The last thing we need is some kind of misunderstanding that could damage relations. As the evening wound down and the various delegations began to depart, Marcus found himself more puzzled than ever. He'd come to the Nexus expecting to deal with cultural misunderstandings and translation difficulties, not mysterious reactions from alien princesses. Walking back to his quarters through the station's quieter corridors, Marcus replayed the evening's events in his mind. Princess Lyralii's reaction had been genuine. He was certain of that. The shock and fear in her eyes had been real. But what could cause a reaction like that? His quarters were small, but comfortable, with a window that looked out into space. As he prepared for bed, Marcus found himself staring out at the stars, wondering if somewhere among them was the answer to tonight's mystery. The next morning brought a new puzzle. Marcus was having breakfast in the embassy's small dining area when Ambassador Rodriguez appeared with a troubled expression. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "I just received a formal request from the Zephyrian delegation." "What kind of request?" "They want you transferred off the station immediately." Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. "What? Why?" "They won't say." The request came through proper diplomatic channels, but it's completely unprecedented. They're not demanding it, exactly, but they're making it very clear that your presence here is unwelcome. This is insane. I haven't done anything wrong. I barely even spoke to anyone from their delegation last night. I know, and that's exactly what makes this so concerning. The Zephyrians don't make requests like this lightly. Something about you has them seriously spooked. Marcus sat back in his chair, his mind racing. What are you going to do? Nothing for now. You're here on legitimate diplomatic business, and I'm not about to transfer you just because the Zephyrians are being mysterious. But I need you to be extra careful. No unnecessary contact with their delegation, and if you do have to interact with them, make sure they're witnesses. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of administrative tasks and briefings. Marcus tried to focus on his work, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. The Zephyrian's request for his transfer suggested that Princess Lyraliai's reaction hadn't been a momentary shock, but something more serious. During his lunch break, Marcus decided to do some research. The station's library was one of the most comprehensive in the galaxy, with access to historical records from hundreds of different civilizations. If there was some connection between humans and Zephyrians that he wasn't aware of, he might be able to find it there. The library was located in one of the station's quieter sectors, a vast space filled with holographic displays and data terminals. Beings from various species sat at workstations, accessing information from across the galaxy. Marcus found an available terminal and began his search. He started with basic Zephyrian history and culture, looking for any references to humans or Earth. The Zephyrians were an ancient species with a recorded history spanning over 50,000 years. They had been spacefaring for millennia before humans had even developed agriculture. Their society was based on crystalline technology and what they called harmonic resonance, the idea that all things in the universe were connected by invisible vibrations. As Marcus dug deeper into Zephyrian history, he began to find references to something called the Resonance Wars, a series of conflicts that had occurred roughly 20,000 years ago. The records were fragmentary and often contradictory, but they seemed to involve some kind of enemy that could disrupt Zephyrian harmonic technology. One particular passage caught his attention. The disruptors possessed an inherent resistance to harmonic manipulation, making them immune to our most powerful weapons. Their very presence seemed to create zones of harmonic silence, dead spaces where our technology failed to function. Marcus frowned. Could this have something to do with humans? He knew that human technology was based on entirely different principles than most galactic civilizations. While most alien species used various forms of energy manipulation or bioengineering, human technology was still largely mechanical and electronic. He was deep in thought when a shadow fell across his workstation. Looking up, he saw a figure in a hooded robe standing beside him. The being was tall and slender, with the graceful movements characteristic of Zephyrians. "You are the human called Marcus Chun," the figure said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Can I help you?" The figure pulled back its hood, revealing the unmistakable features of Princess Lyraliai. Up close, she was even more striking than she had been at the reception. Her crystalline skin seemed to contain depths of light that shifted and moved like aurora, and her violet eyes held an intelligence that was both ancient and ageless. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "But not here. Meet me in Garden 7 in 1 hour. Come alone." Before Marcus could respond, she had pulled her hood back up and glided away between the library stacks, moving with the fluid grace of water flowing downhill. Marcus sat staring after her for several minutes, his mind reeling. Princess Lyraliai wanted to meet with him privately, despite her obvious distress at seeing him. Whatever was going on, it was bigger than just a simple case of mistaken identity. Garden 7 turned out to be one of the smaller parks scattered throughout the station, designed to provide quiet spaces for contemplation and private conversation. The environmental controls were set to simulate a temperate Earth-like environment, with real trees and flowering plants creating natural alcoves and secluded spots. Marcus arrived early and found a bench near a small pond where robotic fish swam in lazy circles. The sound of artificial wine through the leaves was soothing, and he could understand why this would be a good place for a private conversation. Princess Lyraliai appeared exactly on time, still wearing the hooded robe that concealed her distinctive appearance. She moved to the bench and sat beside him, but maintained careful distance, as if afraid that getting too close might be dangerous. "You have questions," she said without preamble. "A few," Marcus replied dryly, "starting with why you look like you'd seen a ghost when you saw me last night." She was quiet for a long moment, her hands clasped in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was soft and seemed to carry undertones that resonated in Marcus's chest. "Tell me, Marcus Chun, What do you know of your species' origins? What does that have to do with anything? Please, humor me. Marcus shrugged. The usual story. Evolution, natural selection, gradual development of intelligence and technology. We're from Earth, third planet in the Sol system. And before that, before your species evolved on Earth. Before that, there was no before that. Humans evolved on Earth from earlier primate species. Princess Lyralii turned to look at him directly for the first time, and Marcus saw something that might have been pity in her violet eyes. That is what your people believe, yes. But it is not the truth. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What are you talking about? Your species did not evolve on Earth, Marcus-chun. You were placed there, hidden there, protected there, until you were ready to return to the galaxy. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. That's impossible. We have fossil records, genetic evidence, all of which can be fabricated by sufficiently advanced technology. She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. Tell me, have your scientists never wondered why your species is so remarkably adaptable? Why you can survive in environments that would kill most other species? Why your technology develops along such different lines than other galactic civilizations? Marcus wanted to dismiss her words as nonsense, but something in her tone stopped him. There was no deception here, no attempt to manipulate. She was telling him what she believed to be the truth. Assuming for a moment that any of this is true, he said carefully, "What does it have to do with your reaction to seeing me?" Princess Lyralii stood and walked to the edge of the pond, her reflection shimmering in the artificial water. Because, Marcus-chun, your people are the disruptors. The ones who nearly destroyed my civilization 20,000 years ago. The silence that followed Princess Lyralii's revelation stretched between them like a chasm. Marcus stared at her reflection in the pond, his mind struggling to process what she had just told him. Humans were the disruptors? The mysterious enemy that had nearly destroyed Zephyrian civilization 20,000 years ago? That's impossible, he finally managed. 20,000 years ago, humans were barely using stone tools. We couldn't have been spacefaring. Time, Princess Lyralii said softly, is not as linear as your people believe. The disruptors who fought us were not your current civilization, but what you might become. Or perhaps what you once were, before the Great Exile. She turned back to face him, and Marcus could see the weight of millennia in her violet eyes. The records from that time are fragmentary, deliberately obscured. But what remains tells of a species that appeared seemingly from nowhere, with technology that operated on principles our scientists could not understand. They called themselves by a name that, translated into your language, means those who break the harmony. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked. If what you're saying is true, if humans are somehow connected to this ancient enemy, why warn me? Why not just let your delegation have me transferred? A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. Because I have spent my life studying the old records, trying to understand what really happened during the Resonance Wars. And I have come to believe that the history we teach our children is not the complete truth. She moved closer to the bench, though she still maintained her careful distance from Marcus. The official history says that the disruptors were invaders, bent on conquest and destruction. But there are older records hidden in the deepest archives that tell a different story. They speak of the disruptors as guardians, protectors of something precious that the galaxy's dominant powers sought to destroy. Guardians of what? That is what I have been trying to discover for the past century. And seeing you, feeling the resonance disruption that your presence creates, I believe I may finally be close to the truth. Marcus shook his head, overwhelmed by the implications of what she was saying. This is crazy. Even if I accept that humans are somehow connected to these disruptors, what does it matter now? That war was 20,000 years ago. Wars like that never truly end, Marcus-chun. They simply pause, waiting for the right moment to resume. Princess Lyralii's expression grew grave, and that moment may be closer than any of us realize. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, a soft chime sounded from both their personal communicators. It was the galactic standard signal for an emergency assembly of all diplomatic personnel. "We should return," Princess Lyrelii said, pulling her hood back up to conceal her features. "But this conversation is not over. There are things you need to know, things that could affect the fate of both our peoples." The emergency assembly was being held in the main diplomatic chamber, a vast circular room with seating arranged in concentric rings to accommodate representatives from different species. As Marcus took his place with the human delegation, he noticed that Princess Lyrelii had resumed her position with the Zephyrians, showing no sign of their recent conversation. The reason for the emergency assembly became clear when Admiral Vextar of the Galactic Defense Corps appeared at the central podium. The Admiral was a Kytherian, a species known for their military prowess and their distinctive crystalline exoskeletons. His presence at what was supposed to be a diplomatic station was highly unusual. "Representatives of the Galactic Council," Admiral Vextar began, his translated voice carrying the mechanical precision typical of Kytherian speech. "I regret to inform you that we have detected significant military movements in the Outer Rim territories. Our long-range sensors have identified a fleet of unknown vessels approaching from beyond the galactic edge." A murmur of concern rippled through the assembled diplomats. The Outer Rim was largely unexplored space, home to only a few small colonies and research stations. "The fleet consists of approximately 5,000 vessels of unknown configuration," the Admiral continued. "They are traveling at high velocity and appear to be heading directly for the core worlds. We estimate their arrival in populated space within 6 standard months." Ambassador Rodriguez leaned over to whisper to Marcus. 5,000 ships is enough to threaten any single world's defenses. If they're hostile, initial attempts at communication have failed, Admiral Vextar said. The fleet has not responded to any standard diplomatic protocols. However, our analysis of their energy signatures has revealed something troubling. The Admiral touched a control on the podium, and a holographic display appeared above the assembly. It showed wave patterns and energy readings that meant nothing to Marcus, but he could see several alien delegates exchanging worried glances. These energy signatures are consistent with technology that has not been seen in this galaxy for over 20,000 years. Technology associated with the faction known as the Disruptors. The reaction was immediate and electric. Beings throughout the chamber began speaking in multiple languages, creating a cacophony of concern and confusion. Marcus felt as if the bottom had dropped out of his stomach. The timing of this revelation, coming so soon after his conversation with Princess Lyrelii, could not be coincidental. "Order!" Admiral Vextar called, his amplified voice cutting through the noise. "The Galactic Defense Corps is implementing emergency protocols. All civilian traffic in the Outer Rim is being diverted, and military forces are being positioned to intercept the approaching fleet." Marcus glanced toward the Zephyrian section and saw Princess Lyrelii watching him intently. Even from across the chamber, he could see the grave concern in her expression. "What are the Defense Corps' recommendations for diplomatic protocol?" asked Ambassador Tvara of the Centauran Union. "The Council is convening an emergency session to determine our response," Admiral Vextar replied. "Until then, all diplomatic missions are advised to maintain current positions and await further instructions." As the assembly broke up into smaller groups of worried delegates, Marcus found himself surrounded by questions from other human embassy staff. "Marcus," Ambassador Rodriguez said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately." Now, they retreated to a small conference room adjacent to the main chamber. Rodriguez closed the door and activated a privacy field that would prevent electronic surveillance. "Tell me you don't know anything about this," she said without preamble. "About what? The approaching fleet? I know as much as you do, which is nothing." "No, about the connection between humans and the Disruptors. Because if there is a connection, if humanity has some kind of historical involvement with these people, I need to know about it before the rest of the galaxy starts asking uncomfortable questions. Marcus hesitated. Princess Lyralii had trusted him with information that could potentially cause a panic if it became widely known. But Rodriguez was his superior, and the approaching fleet changed everything. "There might be something," he said carefully. "Princess Lyralii approached me earlier today. She believes that humans might be connected to the ancient disruptors, but not in the way the official history suggests." Rodriguez sat down heavily in one of the chairs. "Explain." Marcus related his conversation with Princess Lyralii, leaving out only the most sensitive details. As he spoke, he could see Rodriguez's expression growing increasingly troubled. "This is a nightmare," she said when he finished. "If word gets out that humans might be related to the disruptors, especially with this fleet approaching, it could destroy our standing in the galactic community overnight. But what if it's true? What if there really is a connection? Then we need to understand what that connection is before anyone else does. Can you arrange another meeting with Princess Lyralii?" Before Marcus could answer, his personal communicator chimed with an incoming message. It was from Princess Lyralii, and it contained only a time and location. "Observation Deck 7, 2 hours. Already done," Marcus said, showing Rodriguez the message. "Good. Find out everything she knows. And, Marcus, be very careful. If this situation escalates, humans could find themselves in a very dangerous position." The 2 hours passed slowly. Marcus spent the time researching everything he could find about the disruptors and the resonance wars, but the information was sparse and often contradictory. Most of the records seemed to have been deliberately obscured or destroyed, leaving only fragments and hints. What he did find was troubling. The disruptors had appeared suddenly in galactic history, wielding technology that seemed to operate on entirely different principles than anything else in the galaxy. They had fought a series of devastating wars against the major galactic powers of the time, wars that had reshaped the political landscape and left entire star systems uninhabitable. But there were inconsistencies in the official accounts. Different species told different versions of the story, and the timeline of events didn't always align properly. It was as if the various galactic civilizations had agreed to a particular version of history while suppressing the actual facts. Observation Deck 7 was located in one of the station's outer rings, offering a panoramic view of the space around the Nexus. When Marcus arrived, he found Princess Lyralii standing at the large viewport, her reflection ghost-like against the star field beyond. "You've heard about the approaching fleet," she said without turning around. "The whole station has heard about it." Admiral Vextar made quite an announcement. What he did not announce, because he does not know it yet, is that the fleet is heading directly for this station. The Nexus is their target. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "How do you know that?" "Because I have been monitoring Zephyrian deep space sensors for decades, watching for signs of the disruptor's return. The fleet's trajectory is unmistakable." She turned to face him, and Marcus could see the weight of terrible knowledge in her expression. "They're coming for you, Marcus Chun, and for any others like you who might be found throughout the galaxy." "Others like me? What do you mean? Did you think that Earth was the only world where your people were hidden?" The ancient records speak of 12 sanctuary worlds, each containing a population of disruptors placed in stasis or primitive development until the time of awakening. Marcus sat down heavily on one of the observation deck's benches. The scope of what Princess Lyralii was suggesting was staggering. "You're saying there are 11 other human civilizations out there? Not human as you understand the term, but related, yes. Each one developing along slightly different lines, adapted to different environments and circumstances. The ones who are coming, they're the first to awaken fully, and they're coming to collect their scattered people. But why now? What's changed?" Princess Lyralii moved away from the viewport and sat beside him, though she still maintained her careful distance. "That is something I've been trying to understand for decades. But I believe it has to do with the galactic situation. The old powers that drove the disruptors into hiding are beginning to reassert themselves. Ancient alliances are forming, old weapons are being prepared. What old powers? You mean the Galactic Council? The Council is only the current face of something much older. There are beings in this galaxy, Marcus, whose lifespans stretch across geological ages. They were old when the disruptors first appeared, and they have spent the intervening millennia preparing for their return. Marcus tried to process this information, but it seemed too vast and complex to fully comprehend. If all this is true, what are we supposed to do about it? I'm just a junior diplomatic attaché. I don't have the authority to negotiate with ancient galactic powers or mysterious fleets from beyond known space. You may not have authority, Princess Lyralii said, but you have something else. Something that makes you unique among all the species in this galaxy. Which is what? The ability to disrupt harmonic technology. In your presence, much of our most advanced equipment simply does not function properly. Energy shields fail, artificial intelligence systems behave erratically, even FTL communication can be affected. Marcus thought about his journey to the Nexus and the various pieces of alien technology he had encountered. Had there been malfunctions? He tried to remember, but nothing obvious came to mind. I haven't noticed any technology failures around me, because most modern galactic technology has been designed with safeguards against harmonic disruption. The lessons of the resonance wars were learned, at least partially, but the safeguards are not perfect, and they do not work against someone with your particular resonance signature. My what? Every conscious being emits a unique pattern of mental energy. Most species produce patterns that are harmonious with galactic standard technology, but your pattern and that of others like you creates interference. It is why you can think thoughts that cannot be read by telepathic species, why probability manipulation fails in your presence, why precognitive abilities become unreliable around your kind. Marcus stared at her, trying to understand the implications. Are you saying that humans are naturally resistant to alien mental powers? Not resistant, disruptive. Your very consciousness creates zones of what we call quantum static, areas where the fundamental forces that govern most galactic technology become unreliable. A horrible thought occurred to Marcus. Is that why you were afraid when you saw me? Because I'm some kind of walking anti-technology field? I was afraid, Princess Lyralii said quietly, because I recognize what you were, and because I know what it means that your people are beginning to awaken. She stood and moved back to the viewport, her reflection transparent against the stars. The galaxy is about to change, Marcus Chun. The old order that has maintained peace for 20,000 years is coming to an end. And your people, the disruptors, the guardians, whatever you choose to call yourselves, are going to be at the center of it all. Guardians? You mentioned that before. Guardians of what? Princess Lyralii was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Of the freedom to think, of the right of consciousness to exist without control or manipulation, of the fundamental principle that sapient beings should be allowed to choose their own destiny. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental controls. And someone is trying to take that away. Someone has been trying to take it away for millions of years. The disruptors were the last group to successfully resist them. And when the resistance failed, your people were scattered and hidden, waiting for the day when the galaxy would need them again. Who? Marcus asked. Who's been trying to control galactic consciousness? Princess Lyralii turned back to him, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked genuinely frightened. They have many names in many languages. The shepherds, the guides, the eternal architects, but they're most commonly known as the minds. I've never heard of them. Few have. They work through intermediaries, through puppet governments, and manufactured crises. They have been shaping galactic civilization for eons, slowly and carefully guiding it toward a particular goal. What goal? Perfect order. A galaxy where every thought is monitored, every action is predetermined, every choice is an illusion. They believe that freedom and chaos are the same thing, and that the only way to achieve true peace is through absolute control. Marcus felt as if the universe had suddenly become a much darker place. And you think they're making their move now? I think they have been making their move for centuries, so gradually that most people haven't noticed. But the approaching fleet changes everything. The return of the disruptors forces them to accelerate their timeline. What do we do? Princess Lyralii looked at him with something that might have been hope mixed with desperation. We prepare for war, Marcus Chun. A war that will determine the future of consciousness itself. As if summoned by her words, both their communicators chimed simultaneously with an emergency alert. The message was brief but chilling. All diplomatic personnel report to emergency stations immediately. The approaching fleet has increased velocity and will arrive in 3 weeks, not 6 months. The Nexus is now under military protection protocols. Marcus looked out at the star field beyond the viewport, wondering if somewhere among those distant points of light, a fleet of ships was carrying his people toward a reunion that could reshape the galaxy. 3 weeks, he said quietly. 3 weeks, Princess Lyralii agreed. And when they arrive, everything changes. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity as the Nexus transformed from a peaceful diplomatic station into a fortress preparing for war. Military vessels arrived hourly, taking up defensive positions around the station. Civilian ships were either evacuated or pressed into service as support vessels. The corridors that had once echoed with the sounds of cultural exchange now rang with the purposeful footsteps of soldiers and the hum of weapons being charged. Marcus found himself caught in the middle of increasingly urgent discussions between Ambassador Rodriguez and officials from various galactic governments. The revelation that humans might be connected to the legendary disruptors had spread through the diplomatic community like wildfire, creating a mixture of fear, suspicion, and desperate hope. The Andromedan Collective wants guarantees that Earth will remain neutral if the approaching fleet proves hostile, Rodriguez told him during one of their briefing sessions. The Regellian Assembly is demanding that all human personnel be placed under protective custody for their own safety. And the Crystalline Hegemony has formally requested that Earth provide detailed information about any human colonies or settlements that might be targeted by the fleet. What are you telling them? The truth, that we know as little about this situation as they do. But that's not going to satisfy anyone much longer. If we can't provide answers soon, Earth could find itself facing a choice between isolation and occupation. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of his species' future settling on his shoulders. Have you been able to contact Earth directly? We've sent several messages through the quantum relay network, but the communications are being monitored and censored by military intelligence. What I can tell you is that Earth's government is in emergency session and the defense fleet has been placed on high alert. What about the other sanctuary worlds that Princess Lyralii mentioned? Have there been any attempts to locate them? Rodriguez's expression grew grim. That's where things get really interesting. As soon as word about the sanctuary worlds got out, several galactic governments started admitting that they've had anomalous populations under observation for decades. The vegan territories have a system where the dominant species displays unusual resistance to psychic manipulation. The Altair Protectorate has been monitoring a world whose inhabitants seem to disrupt advanced AI systems just by being in their presence. So Princess Lyralii was right. There are others. It looks that way. And Marcus, every single one of these populations is being protected by their respective governments. The word protected is doing a lot of work there. It could mean anything from honored guests to prisoners. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. If Earth's situation deteriorated, humanity could find itself in the same position as these other hidden populations, isolated, monitored, and controlled for the supposed good of galactic stability. I need to talk to Princess Lyralii again. She might have more information about what's really happening. Be careful. The Zephyrian delegation is under increased scrutiny since it became known that their princess has been sharing classified historical information with human personnel. Finding Princess Lyralii proved more difficult than Marcus had expected. The Zephyrian section of the station had been placed under heightened security, with military guards stationed at every access point. When Marcus tried to send her a message, he received an automated response stating that all communications to Zephyrian personnel were being monitored and subject to approval. It was Ambassador Thrix of the Saurian Confederacy who provided an unexpected solution. The reptilian diplomat approached Marcus in the station's central plaza, where beings from various species were gathered around holographic displays showing the latest news about the approaching fleet. "Walk with me," Thrix said quietly, "and act as if we're having a casual conversation about trade relations." They strolled toward one of the plaza's quieter corners, past vendors selling exotic foods and artisans displaying their crafts. To any observer, they would have appeared to be two diplomats engaged in routine discussion. "Your Zephyrian friend asked me to give you a message," Thrix said, pausing to examine a display of crystalline sculptures. "She says to meet her in the old archives, sublevel 7, at midnight. She also says to be very careful. There are those who would prefer that certain historical truths remain buried." What does that mean? It means that not everyone wants the mystery of the disruptors solved. There are powerful interests throughout the galaxy that benefit from the current order of things. The return of your people threatens that order. Powerful interests like who? Thrix selected one of the sculptures and held it up to the light, admiring the way it refracted the station's illumination. Have you ever wondered why the major galactic civilizations are so similar in their basic structure? Why every advanced species seems to develop along roughly the same technological and social lines? I assumed it was convergent evolution, similar problems leading to similar solutions. Perhaps. Or perhaps it's because any species that develops in significantly different directions finds itself facing mysterious problems. Plagues that target specific genetic markers. Technical difficulties that prevent faster-than-light travel. Social upheavals that conveniently redirect scientific research away from certain areas. Marcus stared at the Saurian diplomat, trying to understand what he was suggesting. "You're talking about deliberate manipulation on a galactic scale. I'm talking about gardening, Marcus. The careful pruning of species that grow in unwanted directions. The selective breeding of civilizations to produce desired traits. It's been going on for so long that most people accept it as the natural order of things. And you think this is connected to the minds that Princess Lyralii mentioned? I think that there are beings in this galaxy whose perspective spans geological time periods. Beings for whom the rise and fall of entire civilizations is merely a season in their vast garden. And I think they are very concerned about the return of a species that proved immune to their cultivation techniques." Thrix set the sculpture back on its display stand and turned to face Marcus directly. "Be careful tonight, my friend. You are about to learn things that others have died for knowing." The archives were located in one of the oldest sections of the Nexus, areas that predated the current diplomatic functions of the station. Sublevel 7 was particularly ancient, with corridors carved directly from the station's structural material and lighting that had been installed centuries ago. As Marcus made his way through the dimly lit passages, he felt as if he were descending into the memory of the galaxy itself. Princess Lyralii was waiting for him in a chamber lined with crystalline storage matrices, each one containing vast amounts of historical data. She had shed her diplomatic robes in favor of more practical clothing, and Marcus was struck by how different she looked, younger somehow, more vulnerable. "You came," she said with evident relief. "I was not certain you would risk it." "Risk what?" "Meeting with me could be considered an act of sedition, depending on how the current political situation develops. There are those who would prefer that humans remain ignorant of their true heritage." She led him deeper into the archives, past rows of storage matrices that glowed with soft internal light. "I have been accessing the deepest historical records, documents that predate even the official accounts of the Resonance Wars. What I have found changes everything." They stopped before a large crystalline display that showed a three-dimensional star map. As Princess Lyralii activated the display, Marcus saw familiar constellations appear, but with additional markers and annotations that seemed to tell a story across vast spans of time. "This is the galaxy as it was 50,000 years ago," she said, "before the rise of the current galactic order. You can see the distribution of major civilizations, trade routes, and territorial boundaries. The map showed a galaxy that looked very different from the current political structure. Instead of the large, homogeneous territories controlled by species like the Zephyrians and Centaurans, there were thousands of smaller civilizations, each with unique technological and social characteristics. There was much more diversity then," Princess Lyralii explained. "Species developed in radically different directions, creating technologies and social structures that were truly alien to each other. It was a chaotic time, but also a creative one." She touched a control, and the display shifted to show the galaxy 25,000 years later. Many of the smaller civilizations had disappeared, replaced by larger, more uniform territories. This is when the first shepherding began. Subtle influences that encouraged certain types of development while discouraging others. Species that proved too independent or too creative faced increasing difficulties. Their star systems would become unstable, their colonies would fail, their attempts at expansion would meet with mysterious opposition. And the species that survived were the ones that proved amenable to guidance, that accepted certain technological limitations, certain social structures, certain ways of thinking about the universe. Princess Lyralii's expression grew grim. The survivors were those who could be controlled. She activated another sequence, showing the galaxy during the time of the Resonance Wars. Marcus saw the explosion of conflict that Princess Lyralii had described earlier, but now he could see in context. The disruptors hadn't been random invaders. They had been the representatives of hundreds of smaller civilizations that were being systematically eliminated. The disruptors were not a single species, Princess Lyralii said. They were an alliance of all the civilizations that refused to accept the new order. Species that had developed true artificial intelligence, that had unlocked the secrets of consciousness manipulation, that had transcended the physical limitations imposed by traditional technology. What happened to them? They fought, and for a time, they won. The Disruptor Alliance pushed the Shepherds and their client species back to the galactic core. It seemed as if freedom might prevail over control, but it didn't. No, the Shepherds revealed their ultimate weapon, not a technology or a military force, but something much more insidious. Princess Lyralii's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They turned the disruptors against themselves. Marcus stared at the display, trying to understand. How? By offering them what they claimed to want most, the chance to preserve free-thinking species from extinction. The Shepherds proposed a compromise. The disruptors could create sanctuary worlds where their various peoples could be preserved in safety, hidden from the forces that sought to destroy them. All they had to do was withdraw from the war and allow the galactic order to proceed. And they agreed? Some did. They believed they could save their people and wait for a better time to resist. Others fought on, but without unity, the alliance crumbled. The sanctuary world were created, the populations were hidden, and the galaxy entered a new age of peace and stability. Marcus felt a sick understanding creeping over him. Peace and stability under the control of the Shepherds. Exactly. And now, 20,000 years later, the sanctuary populations are beginning to awaken. Your people on Earth developed space travel and made contact with the galactic community. Others are stirring on their hidden worlds. And the approaching fleet is made up of disruptors who never accepted the compromise, Marcus finished, who have spent 20,000 years preparing for another war. Yes, and they're coming to collect their scattered people to rebuild the alliance that once threatened the galactic order. Marcus walked around the display, studying the star map from different angles. The scope of what Princess Lyralii was showing him was staggering, a conspiracy that spanned tens of thousands of years and affected every civilization in the galaxy. Why are you telling me this? If you're right about the Shepherds still being in control, you're risking everything by sharing this information with me. Princess Lyralii turned away from the display, her crystalline skin dim with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as deep emotion. Because I have spent my entire life studying this history, trying to understand what really happened during the Resonance Wars. And the more I learned, the more I realized that the official history we teach is a lie designed to justify 20,000 years of subtle tyranny. But your Zephyrian nobility, your people are one of the major galactic powers. Surely you benefit from the current order. Do we? Look at our society, Marcus. We are a species that once created art and music that could reshape reality itself. Our ancestors built structures that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. We developed technologies that made the impossible routine. She gestured at the archives around them. And what are we now? Diplomats and bureaucrats, managing the careful balance of galactic politics. Our greatest achievements are trade agreements and territorial treaties. We have become gardeners, helping to maintain the very system that destroyed our creative potential. Marcus saw the pain in her violet eyes and understood. Princess Lyralii wasn't just sharing historical information with him. She was confessing her own species' complicity in a system they had once fought against. What do you think will happen when the fleet arrives? I think the Shepherds will reveal themselves openly for the first time in millennia. They will claim that the approaching disruptors are a threat to galactic peace and stability. They will rally the client species to defend the current order. And what about the sanctuary populations? The humans and others like them? Princess Lyralii's expression grew even more troubled. That depends on whether they choose to join their returning cousins or remain loyal to the governments that have protected them. It will be a test of loyalty, and I fear that not all species will pass it. You think some governments will turn against their sanctuary populations? I think some governments will have no choice. If the Shepherds demand it, they will comply. The alternative is to face the same fate that befell the original disruptor civilizations. Marcus felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. Humanity was caught between forces they barely understood, forced to choose between loyalty to the galactic community that had welcomed them and allegiance to ancient cousins they had never known existed. There's something else, Princess Lyralii said quietly. Something I discovered in the deepest archives, in records so old that they predate the current galactic calendar. She activated a new display, this one showing what appeared to be a detailed schematic of some kind of massive structure. The Shepherds didn't just shape galactic civilization through subtle manipulation. They built something, a device or network of devices that spans the entire galaxy. The records call it the consensus engine. What does it do? It enforces conformity of thought on a galactic scale. Every sapient mind in the galaxy is connected to it, whether they know it or not. It influences decision-making, shapes cultural development, even affects the way species evolve. Marcus stared at the schematic, trying to comprehend the implications. You're saying that free will is an illusion? That every choice made by every species in the galaxy is being influenced by this device? Not controlled directly, that would be too obvious, but influenced, guided, nudged in particular directions. The engine doesn't make decisions for people, but it shapes the context in which decisions are made. And the disruptors are immune to it. Yes, that's what made them so dangerous 20,000 years ago, and what makes them dangerous now. They represent the possibility of true freedom of thought, uncontrolled by the consensus engine. A new and terrible understanding dawned on Marcus. The approaching fleet isn't just coming to collect the sanctuary populations. They're coming to destroy the engine. Princess Lyralii nodded grimly. And when they do, every species in the galaxy will suddenly find themselves thinking clearly for the first time in millennia. It will be chaos on an unimaginable scale, but also freedom. Yes, also freedom. They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the accumulated knowledge of galactic history. Marcus felt as if he were standing at a crossroads that would determine the future of consciousness itself. "What do we do with this information?" he asked finally. "That," Princess Lorelei said, "is the question that will define the next age of galactic history. Do we warn our governments about what's coming? Do we try to prevent the destruction of a system that has maintained peace for 20,000 years? Or do we help the disruptors succeed, knowing that the result will be chaos, but also the possibility of genuine freedom?" Before Marcus could answer, an alarm began sounding throughout the archives. Emergency lighting activated, bathing the chamber in harsh red illumination. "Security breach in sub-level 7, came an announcement over the station's communication system. All personnel evacuate immediately." Princess Lyralii quickly deactivated the displays and began erasing their access records. "We've been discovered. You need to leave now." "What about you?" "I have diplomatic immunity, at least for now." "You don't." She pressed a small crystalline device into his hand. "This contains copies of everything we've discussed. Guard it with your life. It may be the only proof of the truth that survives what's coming." As security forces could be heard approaching through the corridors, Marcus realized that his conversation with Princess Lyralii had changed everything. The knowledge she had shared with him was both a gift and a terrible burden. In 3 weeks, when the disruptor fleet arrived at the Nexus, he would have to choose not just his own fate, but potentially the fate of human civilization. The war for the future of consciousness was about to begin, and Marcus Chun, a junior diplomatic attaché who had come to the Nexus hoping to advance his career, found himself standing at the very center of it. All the interrogation room was sterile and white, designed to be psychologically uncomfortable for most known species. Marcus had been sitting in the metal chair for 3 hours, staring across a bare table at 2 beings who represented the sharp end of galactic security services. The first was Agent Kex, a tall Centauran with the distinctive metallic skin and geometric facial features of a species. Centaurans were known for their logical minds and complete lack of emotional expression, making them ideal interrogators. The second was Commander Yivak of the Galactic Intelligence Corps, a being whose species Marcus didn't recognize. Yivak appeared to be roughly humanoid, but with skin that shifted color constantly and eyes that seemed to look in multiple directions simultaneously. "Let me understand this correctly, Attaché Chun," Agent Keck said in his precisely modulated voice. "You claim to have been researching disruptor history purely out of academic curiosity." "That's correct. And your private meetings with Princess Lorelei of the Zephyrian delegation were simply informal discussions about historical events." "Yes." Commander Yivak leaned forward, his skin shifting to a deep purple that Marcus suspected indicated aggressive intent. "Do you take us for fools, human? We know that Princess Lyralii provided you with classified historical data. We know that this data contained information about the consensus engine and other projects that are restricted at the highest levels of galactic security." Marcus kept his expression neutral, though inside his mind was racing. If they knew about the consensus engine, then the conspiracy Princess Lyralii had described went even deeper than he had imagined. The fact that information about it was classified suggested that at least some elements of the current galactic government were aware of the engine's existence and were actively working to keep it secret. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said. "Princess Lyralii and I discussed general historical topics. If some of that information is classified, I wasn't aware of it." Agent Kex touched a control on the table, and a holographic display appeared showing security footage from the archives. Marcus watched himself and Princess Lyralii examining the star maps and historical displays, their conversation clearly showing the transfer of sensitive information. "Audio surveillance was blocked by Zephyrian privacy shields," Keck said, "but the visual record is quite clear. You are accessing data files that require security clearances you do not possess." I was following Princess Lyralii's lead. I assumed she had proper authorization. "Princess Lyralii," Commander Yivak said, his skin now shifting to an ominous shade of red, is currently being held by Zephyrian security pending charges of treason against the Galactic Order. Her diplomatic immunity has been revoked by her own government. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. If the Zephyrians had turned against one of their own princesses for sharing historical information, then the forces Princess Lyralii had warned him about were already moving to protect their secrets. "Where is she being held?" Marcus asked. "That is classified information," Kex replied. "Your concern should be with your own situation. Unauthorized access to restricted historical data is a serious crime under galactic law. However, your government has requested that you be transferred to human custody rather than face trial here." "What does that mean?" "It means," Commander Yivak said, "that you will be returning to Earth on the next available transport. Your diplomatic status is being revoked, and you are being declared persona non grata throughout galactic space." Marcus understood the implications immediately. Earth's government was cutting him loose, sacrificing him to protect the planet's relationship with the galactic community. It was probably the smart political move, but it left him feeling abandoned and betrayed. "When does the transport leave?" "In 6 hours," Kex said. "You will remain in custody until then." As the interrogators left him alone in the White Room, Marcus tried to process everything that had happened. In the space of a week, he had gone from being an eager young diplomat to being a political prisoner caught in the middle of a conspiracy that spanned galactic history. The crystalline data device that Princess Lyralii had given him was hidden in a compartment in his quarters, but he had no way to retrieve it before being shipped back to Earth. The hours passed slowly. Marcus was given basic meals and allowed to use a monitor communication terminal to contact his family on Earth, but he was not permitted any visitors or access to news feeds. He had no way of knowing what was happening in the wider galaxy as the Disruptor fleet continued its approach toward the Nexus. When the time came for transport, Marcus was escorted through the station's corridors by 2 security officers. The route they took avoided the main diplomatic areas, keeping him away from any potential supporters or sources of information. As they walked, Marcus caught glimpses of the increased military presence throughout the station. Armed soldiers were stationed at every major intersection, and he could see defensive weapons being installed at strategic points. The transport ship was a small, fast courier vessel designed for quick trips between major systems. The passenger compartment was Spartan but functional, with seating for perhaps 20 beings. Marcus was the only passenger, making the journey feel even more like an exile than a simple diplomatic transfer. As the ship departed from the Nexus, Marcus pressed his face to the small porthole and watched the massive station grow smaller in the distance. Somewhere aboard that structure, Princess Lyralii was being held prisoner for the crime of revealing the truth about galactic history. Somewhere in the space beyond, a fleet of ships carrying his ancient cousins was approaching for a confrontation that could reshape the galaxy. The journey to Earth would take 3 days through hyperspace. Marcus spent the time trying to piece together everything he had learned and plan for what he would do when he arrived home. The knowledge that Princess Lyralii had shared with him was dangerous, but it was also potentially crucial for humanity's survival in the coming conflict. On the 2nd day of the journey, something unexpected happened. Marcus was in his small cabin when the ship's emergency alarms began sounding. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, causing objects to float momentarily before crashing back down. "All passengers prepare for emergency hyperspace exit," came the pilot's voice over the intercom. "We are experiencing technical difficulties." Marcus strapped himself into his bunk as the ship shuddered and dropped out of hyperspace. Through his porthole, he could see the normal elongated stars of hyperspace give way to the pinprick lights of normal space. But these were not familiar constellations. They were somewhere far from any established shipping lane. The cabin's communication screen activated, showing the face of the ship's pilot, a grizzled Andromedan with the distinctive scaled skin and large eyes of a species. "Passenger Chun, report to the bridge immediately," the pilot said. We have a situation that requires your attention. Marcus made his way through the ship's narrow corridors to the bridge, a cramped space dominated by control consoles and navigation displays. The pilot, who had introduced himself as Captain Vorth, was studying a long-range sensor readout with obvious confusion. "What's the problem, Captain?" "The problem," Vorth said, "is that our navigation systems just failed completely. Every single piece of Galactic's standard navigation equipment on this ship has stopped functioning properly." Marcus felt a familiar chill. What kind of malfunction? Not malfunction, interference. Something is disrupting the quantum resonance patterns that our navigation systems depend on. It's like there's a massive source of harmonic static somewhere nearby. Where are we? That's the interesting question. According to our last reliable position fix, we're in an uncharted system about 50 light-years from the main shipping lane between the Nexus and Sol. There's no record of any inhabited worlds or significant stellar phenomena in this region. Captain Vorth activated the ship's main view screen, showing the space around them. At first, Marcus saw only stars and empty space. Then Vorth enhanced the display, and something remarkable became visible. Ships, hundreds of them, possibly thousands, arranged in a vast formation that stretched across millions of kilometers of space. They were unlike anything in Marcus's experience, sleek, organic-looking vessels that seemed to grow rather than be built. Their hulls glowed with soft, bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in complex rhythms. "The disruptor fleet," Marcus whispered. "That's what I was afraid you'd say," Vorth replied. "And they're coming this way." As if responding to their observation, several of the alien vessels began moving toward the transport ship. They approached with fluid grace, their movements more like swimming than conventional spaceflight. "Are they armed?" Marcus asked. "I can't tell. Their technology doesn't register on our sensors the way normal weapons would. But, given their reputation, I think we should assume they're capable of defending themselves." Marcus studied the approaching ships, trying to understand what he was seeing. These were the vessels of his people's ancient cousins, the disruptors who had never accepted the compromise that led to the sanctuary worlds. For 20,000 years, they had been preparing for this return to galactic space. "Captain, open a communication channel. Broadcast on all standard frequencies." "Are you insane? These beings destroyed half the galaxy 20,000 years ago. They're also my people's ancestors. And right now, they're probably the only force in the galaxy that might be willing to stand against the consensus engine." Captain Vorth looked at Marcus as if he had declared his intention to juggle live plasma grenades. But he activated the communication system. "This is Transport Vessel Wanderer calling unknown ships. Please respond." The response came immediately, but not in the way Marcus had expected. Instead of voice transmission, patterns of light began appearing on the bridge displays. Complex geometric shapes that shifted and evolved in ways that seemed almost alive. "What is that?" Vorth asked. "I think it's a language," Marcus said, studying the patterns. "But not one that uses words or sounds." As he watched the light patterns, Marcus began to see recurring motifs and themes. The shapes seemed to represent concepts rather than specific words, ideas about identity, purpose, and belonging that transcended simple communication. One pattern in particular caught his attention. It showed a complex spiral that seemed to represent the galaxy itself, with various nodes and connections that might indicate different species or civilizations. Within the spiral, certain areas glowed more brightly than others, and Marcus realized he was looking at a map of the sanctuary worlds. "They know about us," he said. "They know about all the hidden populations." As if responding to his understanding, the communication pattern shifted to show Earth highlighted within the galactic map. Then it expanded to show Sol system in detail, with Earth position clearly marked. New patterns appeared, these showing movement and direction. Marcus interpreted them as a request, or perhaps an invitation. "They want us to follow them," he told Captain Vorth. "Follow them where?" "I think to a meeting. They want to gather all the sanctuary populations before they make their move against the galactic core." Captain Vorth stared at the alien ships surrounding them, clearly torn between his duty to deliver Marcus to Earth and the increasingly obvious fact that the normal rules of galactic civilization were breaking down. If we follow them, he said finally, there's no guarantee we'll ever make it back to civilized space. If we don't follow them, Marcus replied, there might not be any civilized space left to return to. The decision was taken out of their hands when the ship's engines suddenly activated without any input from the crew. The transport began moving, guided by forces that their technology couldn't detect or counter. They're taking control of our ship, Vorth said, his scaled hands moving frantically over the control panels. No, Marcus said, watching the light patterns on the communications display. They're inviting us to join them. There's a difference. As the transport ship was gently guided into formation with the disruptor fleet, Marcus felt as if he were crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. Behind them lay the galaxy he had known, with its careful diplomatic balances and hidden tyrannies. Ahead lay the unknown, a confrontation between forces that had been preparing for this moment for 20,000 years. The light patterns on the communication display shifted one final time, showing an image that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. It was Earth, but not as he had ever seen it. The planet was glowing with the same bioluminescent patterns as the disruptor ships, as if the world itself had awakened to its true nature. They're showing us what Earth could become, Marcus realized. What humanity could become if we embrace our heritage as disruptors. And what's the alternative? Captain Vorth asked. Marcus thought about Princess Lyralii, imprisoned for revealing the truth. He thought about the consensus engine, subtly shaping the thoughts of every sapient being in the galaxy. He thought about the choice facing not just humanity, but every species caught between the security of control and the uncertainty of freedom. The alternative, he said quietly, is to remain gardeners in someone else's carefully cultivated paradise. As the disruptor fleet continued its journey toward the galactic core, carrying Marcus and Captain Vorth along with them, the final phase of the war for consciousness was about to begin. Across the galaxy, on Earth and 11 other sanctuary worlds, hidden populations were beginning to remember what they had once been and what they might become again. The shepherds had spent 20,000 years believing that the disruptors were safely contained, their threat neutralized through careful manipulation and control. They were about to discover that some fires, no matter how carefully banked, never truly go out. They only wait for the right moment to burn again. The disruptor mothership was beyond anything Marcus had imagined. From the outside, it appeared to be a single massive vessel, but once their transport was brought inside, he realized it was more like a living city. Corridors pulsed with bioluminescent veins that carried both light and what appeared to be some kind of fluid. The walls themselves seemed organic, growing in complex patterns that shifted and changed as he watched. Captain Vorth stayed close to Marcus as they were escorted through the ship by beings that were clearly related to humanity, but had evolved along radically different lines. They were taller than baseline humans, with elongated limbs and enlarged craniums that suggested enhanced brain capacity. Their skin had a faint translucent quality, and Marcus could see patterns of light moving beneath the surface, internal neural networks made visible. "Welcome, cousin," said one of their escorts in perfectly understandable English, though the voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. "I am Coordinator Zell. We have been waiting a long time for this reunion. How long have you been watching us?" Marcus asked as they walked through corridors that seemed to grow larger to accommodate their passage. "Always. The sanctuary worlds were never truly hidden from us. We helped establish them, after all. But the agreement was that we would not interfere until the awakening began naturally. And Earth's achievement of space flight triggered that awakening. Among other factors, your species has reached the point where continued isolation would stunt your development. It is time for the children of humanity to learn about their extended family." They entered a vast chamber that Marcus initially thought was some kind of command center. Banks of organic consoles lined the walls, operated by beings who seemed to interface with them directly through touch and thought. But as his eyes adjusted to the complex lighting, he realized this wasn't just a control room. It was a parliament. Representatives from dozens of different human subspecies were gathered here, each adapted to different environments and evolutionary pressures. Some were clearly designed for high-gravity worlds, with dense bone structure and powerful musculature. Others appeared to